The pain started before dawn, sharp and unrelenting, curling up from deep within her spine and wrapping around her belly like a vine of fire. Nyoka bit down on the fraying end of her wrapper to keep from screaming too loud. She knew no one would come anyway. Not after what the elders had said. Not after the whispers. Not after they had spat near her feet and called the bulge beneath her belly a punishment. The shed they threw her into was no place for birthing. The thatch roof leaked, and the dirt floor was cold and littered with husks of old sorghum and mouse droppings. But she had no choice. Her own mother had turned her face away weeks ago. The midwife crossed herself and muttered prayers before walking backward out of her life. They all said it, a cursed child bears a cursed womb. And Nyoka had never been one to argue with the weight of a whole village's fear. Her body clenched again, harder this time. She dropped to her knees, palms pressing into the floor as another wave hit. She moaned. Sweat rolled down her back in rivulets. Her breaths came fast, ragged, uneven. Hours passed like that, her alone, contorting in pain, crying not just from the agony but from the heartbreak of being unwanted. Her tears soaked into the earth, unnoticed by the gods above or the people nearby. When the final wave came, it ripped through her like a storm tearing through reeds. Her scream this time did pierce the air, but no one came. Not even a curious child or a passing goat. And then, silence. For a moment, a soft, eternal silence settled over the shed like a final blessing. The baby slipped out without a cry. Nyoka collapsed forward, her body trembling. She reached down with bloody, shaking hands and pulled the child to her chest. A boy. His skin was pale, almost blue, like river clay. His eyes were closed, his lips parted but still. Too still. She rubbed his back. She slapped his tiny foot gently, then harder. She placed her ear to his chest. Nothing. No. No. Not like this, she whispered, rocking him gently. Please, please, wake up. But the baby didn't move. His little body hung limp in her arms. Nyoka wrapped him tightly in the same wrapper that had covered her swollen belly for months, the only thing she had left. The wrapper was torn and dirty, but it was warm. She held him to her breast, hoping the heartbeat would stir him. Still nothing. Outside, voices murmured. They had come. The village elders stood at a distance, their faces grim and lined with age and fear. One of them held his staff like a weapon. The others avoided her gaze. The midwife returned, but only to nod solemnly and confirm what they already believed. Stillborn, she said. It is a sign. A sign of what? Nyoka croaked from the floor, still clutching the child. Of my sin? Of your cruelty? They didn't answer. The chief arrived last, robed in red and draped in sacred beads. His voice was heavy with authority but hollow inside. We warned her, he said. The child was not blessed. Her dreams defied the shrine. The father unknown. Her belly grew on shadowed days. The gods have spoken. Please, Nyoka said, her voice ragged. He was mine. He is mine. The chief would not meet her eyes. Instead, he pointed toward the woods. Two men stepped forward. They carried chains. One of them held a rusted iron door. Nyoka froze. No, she whispered. No, no, please. But they didn't stop. They dragged her from the shed, her legs too weak to fight. She screamed when they tried to take the baby. She held him tighter, curling her body around his like a shell, and they let her keep him, perhaps out of fear, perhaps out of shame. But they led her barefoot down the narrow path that led into the trees, where the elders claimed spirits still walked. Where no one built homes. Where the wind never blew the same way twice. There stood the cage, an old iron prison from the time of slave raids, rusted with age, large enough to hold a lion. It sat beneath a crooked baobab, its roots like fingers trying to pull it into the earth. Let the spirits claim what they must, the chief said again, turning away. She didn't go quietly. Nyoka kicked and thrashed and cursed their names. She spat at the dust near the chief's feet. She begged. She howled. She cried out to mothers and ancestors long dead. She screamed until her throat cracked and bled. But they shoved her in anyway. The iron door slammed shut with a sound that echoed like thunder, and the lock clicked. One by one, the villagers walked away. No one looked back. Not even the midwife. As the last footsteps faded, Nyoka sank to the floor of the cage, cradling the baby to her chest. The wrapper smelled like smoke and blood. His face was nestled just beneath her chin. She began to hum. Slowly, softly, shakily. A lullaby her own mother used to sing. Her voice cracked halfway through. But she kept singing anyway, to dead ears and fading dreams. And there, beneath the twisted tree in a cage not fit for beasts, a mother rocked her stillborn in the dark, and waited for the sky to remember she was alive. The rain began the same night they locked her in. A slow drizzle at first, like the sky itself hesitated to mourn. Then came the downpour, harsh and unrelenting. It turned the dry leaves to mush and carved small rivers through the red earth. Nyoka sat curled in one corner of the cage, holding the baby close as water pooled around her ankles. The iron bars groaned in the wind, dripping rust. Her back pressed against the cold metal, and each breath she took was misted, shallow, and shaking. The baby hadn't stirred. His body was still soft the first day. Still warm, almost. She wrapped him tighter, whispering nonsense words, anything to fill the silence between her heartbeat and his stillness. By the second day, his tiny limbs began to stiffen. His hands no longer curled around her finger, even by accident. His lips dried and cracked. His eyelids, closed gently at first, now sagged slightly open, just enough to show slivers of unmoving white. Still, she held him. Still, she sang. Her voice grew quieter with each passing day. Not from weariness, but from something deeper, a quiet undoing of the spirit. She forgot words halfway through, repeated lines over and over. Sometimes she only hummed, head tilted back against the bars, raindrops sliding down her face like tears she could no longer afford to shed. The village remained distant. No one brought food. No one checked to see if she still lived. They had done what they believed was right, delivered her to the spirits, washed their hands, and returned to their dry mats and cooking fires. But the forest did not forget. Nights were the worst. The cold became something alive, something that crept through the bars and clawed at her bones. Her fingers trembled when she touched the baby's face, not just from the chill, but from the slow horror of what his skin had become. A firmness. A stillness. And yet, there was no rot. No smell of death. Just the faintest scent of iron and clay, like fresh soil disturbed before planting. Outside, animals prowled. She heard them first, the soft pads of paws circling the cage, the sniffing. Then the gleam of eyes in the dark. Pairs. Sometimes many. Too high to be dogs. Too low to be anything she could name. They watched her from the trees, blinking slowly, as if in silent judgment. One night, she screamed at them. Not out of fear, but fury. "What do you want?" she rasped. "He's not yours. Leave us." The eyes didn't blink. They simply vanished into the shadows. Days bled into each other. The rain soaked her wrapper until it hung like a second skin. Her hair matted against her skull. Her hands, once soft, blistered and peeled. Hunger gnawed at her ribs, but she barely noticed anymore. What did food matter to a woman already buried? She stopped speaking entirely by the 5th day. Even her prayers shriveled and died. She only rocked now, back and forth, like a cradle. Her lips moved, but no sound came. Her lullabies had become breathless movements, just enough to keep the air between her and the baby from going completely still. And yet, despite it all, she refused to let go. The village pretended she didn't exist. But gossip has thin skin and sharp claws. Whispers started. They always do. A woman fetching water claimed she heard singing in the rain, though the wind was howling too loud to be sure. A man tending goats said he saw something shift in the cage, not the mother, but something else. A flicker of movement under the wrapper. A twitch. A blink. They dismissed it. Until a child said it. He ran through the village screaming. Not out of fear, but with the kind of urge and excitement only children know. The baby moved, he cried. I saw it move. It looked at me. The elders dragged him to the center of the compound, made him kneel, made him repeat himself. It opened its eyes, the boy insisted, eyes wide. Just a little. They were black. Like shiny stones. They slapped him for lying. But he kept saying it, over and over, tears streaking his dusty cheeks. It looked at me. The elders warned everyone not to go near the forest path. Not to listen to strange sounds. Not to speak of the cage. It was done. The spirits would take what they wanted. The rest must move on. But fear had already settled in like mold. More villagers reported strange dreams. Infants cried longer than usual. Food spoiled too quickly. Chickens stopped laying. The midwife's youngest child developed a rash that no herb could soothe. No one said it aloud, but everyone thought the same thing. They had buried a mother, but perhaps not a corpse. That night, the rain stopped. For the first time in nearly a week, the skies cleared. The moon came out, bloated and red, casting long shadows across the village and down the narrow path toward the cage. Inside, Nyoka sat motionless. Her arms still cradled the baby. Her eyes were open, unblinking, watching nothing. And beneath the torn wrapper, where her hand rested gently over the child's chest, she felt something she had not felt since the night he was born. Warmth. A breath. Faint, but there. So faint, she thought she had imagined it. But she didn't move. She didn't speak. She just closed her eyes again, tightened her grip, and kept rocking, as if the act of holding was all that tethered both of them to this world. It started with a single crow. Slick, black, and bold, it circled once above the twisted baobab and landed with a click on the cage's rusted top bar. Its feathers shone like oil in the sun, its eyes dark and calculating. Nyoka didn't move. She sat beneath the bird, her arms wrapped around the baby, whose body still lay swaddled in the wrapper that had grown stiff with days of dampness and dried blood. The crow tilted its head. Then another came. Then 5. By dusk, over a dozen crows clung to the cage's top and sides, some perched in the branches above, others on the ground just beyond the reach of her bare feet. They caught occasionally, but mostly, they watched, their heads twitching with unnatural stillness, their presence heavy with something more than instinct. One hopped down. It landed just beside Nyoka's leg, then turned toward the baby and let out a sharp, deliberate caw. She blinked slowly, her lips chapped and cracked from days of silence. The crow moved closer. She tightened her hold on the baby. And then, bold as fate, the crow lunged, its beak jabbing toward the child's cheek. It aimed not for the eyes or the lips, but for the place just beneath the skin, as if it sensed a softness still worth pecking. A droplet of red welled up, shockingly fresh. Nyoka's body moved before her mind did. Her hand shot forward and gripped the bird with a strength no one starving should have had. It squawked in panic, its wings flailing wildly, but she pulled it toward her mouth, her eyes wide, glassy, wild. She bit. Not with hesitation, but with purpose. Her teeth sank into its neck. The crow shrieked once, then went limp. Blood, hot, coppery, spilled onto her lips and chin. Some of it dripped onto the baby's swaddle. The other crows did not flee. They watched. She chewed once, then spat feathers to the ground. Her chest rose and fell with ragged breaths, her shoulders trembling. But her face no longer looked exhausted. Something had shifted. She leaned back, closed her eyes, and began to speak. Not words. Names. Softly at first, in a language she did not know. Names that rolled off her tongue like old friends summoned from graves. Names that belonged to no one in the village. Names with weight and rhythm, some whispered, others chanted, some repeated over and over until the sounds didn't feel human anymore. And while she chanted, the baby began to change. The first to notice was the skin, no longer waxen and gray, but darkening. Slowly, steadily, the color returned, not with the warmth of life but something deeper, older. A shadowed richness spread from his chest to his arms, as if ink had been poured beneath the skin. The cut on his cheek did not bleed again. Instead, the mark sealed itself with a thin layer of skin. Nyoka didn't blink. She rocked. She muttered. The blood from the crow still stained her lips. The crows around her bowed their heads. Back in the village, unease slithered through every compound like smoke. At first, they thought the heat was to blame. But no, the food spoiled faster than usual. Ground yams turned black by morning. Meat swarmed with maggots overnight. Even water drawn fresh from the stream smelled bitter, like copper and rot. Chickens stopped clucking. One elder's goat keeled over, its mouth foaming, eyes wide with something unseen. Children tossed in their sleep, waking with fevered cries. Some swore they saw a woman standing outside their windows, her face half shadow, half light, holding something swaddled in her arms. The chief called the elders together. They sat in a circle beneath the judgment tree, beads tight around their necks, charms clutched in trembling hands. "What did we bury?" one asked in a whisper. "It was not a burial," said another, "but a sacrifice." The midwife, who had avoided the path to the forest ever since the cage was sealed, finally spoke. "I heard her voice," she said. "In my dreams. Calling names I'd never heard." The chief's jaw tightened. He'd heard it too. That low chant in the rain, like something crawling from beneath the earth. But his pride would not allow fear to show. He raised his staff and struck the ground once. "It is too late," he declared. "The dead must not be disturbed. We sealed her fate with the blessing of the ancestors. If we interfere now, we bring the spirit's wrath upon all of us." "But what if it's already here?" the midwife asked, her voice small. No one answered. Because they all felt it, the way the air shifted whenever the wind passed from the direction of the cage. The way shadows stretched longer near the forest path. The way their hearts skipped when they heard a sound in the distance that might have been a crow, or a child crying. No one dared walk that path anymore. Not even the bravest boys. They sent offerings instead, baskets of herbs, dried fish, a gourd of palm wine, left at the edge of the forest and turned back without looking. No one mentioned Nyoka's name, as if speaking it would summon something into their homes. But even silence could not stop what had begun. That evening, the sky turned purple. Crows gathered again, now by the dozens, not only on the cage, but along rooftops, fences, trees. They didn't cry out. They simply sat, wings folded, as if waiting for a sermon. Inside the cage, Nyoka still rocked. Still chanted. Still held her baby. He no longer felt cold. His skin had fully darkened now, his lips no longer cracked. His chest did not rise or fall, but Nyoka's ear never left it, and in her mind, she heard it. A rhythm. A promise. And so she smiled, faintly, blood still dry on her chin, as the crows whispered above her. Mwamba had been blind for 22 years, but the way she walked through the village made people believe otherwise. Her feet never stumbled. Her cane tapped with rhythm, not hesitation. And though her eyes were pale and cloudy, it often felt as though she could see straight through flesh and bone, into the soft places where secrets lived. People called her the one who dreams too loudly, not because she screamed in sleep, but because she remembered too much when she woke. She told stories no one wanted to hear. Named people long dead. Described things buried beneath homes and hidden in bloodlines. They tried to ignore her, the way one ignores the rustling of dry leaves on a restless night. But now, they began to listen. The morning after the crows came in flocks, Mwamba sat near the fire, braiding thin strings of dried bark into cords. She did not look up when the chief's wife approached. "It's starting," Mwamba said before the woman could speak. "The wind carries it. The trees are waking. The woman hesitated. You speak of the girl? I speak of what she carries. She carries a corpse. No, Mwamba said, her hands never stopping. She carries memory. A memory we buried, thinking it would never claw its way back. The chief's wife grew pale. That night, Mwamba left her compound. She walked slowly, barefoot, following a path only she knew. The villagers pretended not to see her. Some turned away. A boy cried out when he spotted her near the old yam field, muttering to herself. She carried a satchel of herbs and dried flower heads. Their scent was pungent and bitter, strong enough to wake spirits. She also carried a single cowrie shell wrapped in black cloth, a relic from her daughter's neck, one she had kept hidden for 19 years. By the time she reached the forest path, the moon hung low and bruised in the sky. The cage loomed ahead, glinting faintly in the moonlight, crows still perched like sentries. The trees rustled with no wind. The air felt swollen. Mwamba stopped 5 paces from the cage. She did not speak at first. She only listened. There, under the breath of night, a hum. Not from the trees. Not from the insects. A human hum. Familiar and broken, stitched together with pain. Mwamba's lips trembled. I used to hum like that, she said softly. When the pain wouldn't stop. She stepped closer. Nyoka sat inside, her hair now tangled with leaves, her eyes sunken but still open. The baby lay in her arms, motionless, but somehow whole. Mwamba tilted her head. I know what you are, she whispered. Nyoka did not respond. Not with words. But her head turned. Slowly. Her chin lifted. And for the first time in weeks, she saw someone outside the cage who wasn't afraid to look back. You've been singing to him, Mwamba said. But not in your voice. Not in your tongue. Nyoka's mouth parted slightly, but no sound came. Mwamba knelt beside the cage and reached into her satchel, pulling out the herbs. She sprinkled them through the bars, small black leaves that sizzled when they hit the ground. This blend was taught to me by a woman who gave birth to something that breathed without lungs. She burned before she screamed. But her child lived for a moment. Nyoka blinked. I see her in you, Mwamba said. My daughter. Her name was Zerani. She died with a child in her womb, a stillborn, they called it. But I heard that baby sigh once before they buried them both. A tear escaped from beneath her blind eye. The village called her cursed too. But they were wrong. Some children come not to live but to return. Mwamba reached for the cowrie shell and placed it through the bars. It rolled and settled at Nyoka's foot. I came to tell you something the elders won't, she said. The child you hold is not dead. He is waiting. The crows above shifted, flapping wings softly. You are not just a mother, Nyoka. You are a key. And they locked you in a cage not knowing it was a door. Mwamba leaned forward and began to hum, a tune older than drums, older than fire. It rose from her throat like smoke, curling through the night air. A lullaby from before memory. Nyoka's shoulders shook. Her grip on the baby softened. Then, slowly, her head leaned toward the sound, as if her bones remembered it even if her mind did not. When Mwamba stopped, the trees sighed. A single crow cawed once. You remind me of her, Mwamba said again, standing to leave. But even she didn't shine like you do when death touches your feet. She turned away, tapping her cane gently against the path. And behind her, Nyoka whispered one word, a name she'd never heard before, but that passed her lips like breath returning to the body. Zerani. On the 7th night, the wind did not howl. The crows did not cry. Even the insects held their breath. Instead, silence crawled over the village like a fog, thick, suffocating, unnatural. The goats were the first to notice. Huddled near their pens at the edge of the fields, they stirred uneasily, stamping hooves into the packed earth. One bleated sharply into the night, staring in the direction of the forest. Another shivered as if sensing a sudden drop in temperature. The rest followed, forming a circle, their heads low, ears twitching at every unseen whisper between the trees. In the distance, just past the thorn fences and ancestral stones, the iron cage sat beneath the crooked baobab, unmoved for a week. But that night, it creaked. A sound like rusted bone shifting in its socket. It began with a gentle groan, as if the cage exhaled for the first time in years. Then, metal ground against metal in a slow, reluctant motion. The lock, untouched by hands, shuddered. The door, rust-welded shut by rain and time, trembled, then shifted. 1 inch. Just enough to change everything. Inside, Nyoka did not sleep. She hadn't slept in days, not since the crows came. Not since the woman who dreamed 2 loudly whispered songs that stitched themselves into Nyoka's marrow. She sat curled around her child, rocking without rhythm, her eyes wide and unblinking. And now, her eyes glowed. Not brightly, not like fire or lightning. But faintly, a soft, silvery shimmer that pulsed in time with her breath, flickering with an inner storm. It was not the glow of health or magic. It was the glow of something waking up inside her, something that had slumbered long beneath her blood. She didn't react when the cage creaked open. She didn't move when the wind curled inside and lifted a lock of her tangled hair. But she did feel the shift. In her arms, the baby twitched. Just one hand. A small, sudden jerk, not from the cold, not from decay, but from something purposeful. Something remembered. The fingers tightened slightly, brushing her skin like a memory of a grip. Her breath caught. She lowered her face, her ear grazing his chest. Nothing at first. Then, a flutter. A beat. A pulse. Small, stuttering, unsure, but there. The baby's eyelids trembled. A flicker. Nyoka looked down, heart thundering beneath her ribs. His eyes opened. Not wide. Not fully. But enough. Black. Shiny. Deep as the space between stars. They didn't focus on her, nor blink like a living child's might. They just opened, like windows, and for a moment, she felt herself staring not into the eyes of a newborn, but into something else. Something that had seen too much before breath had ever touched his lips. Her arms trembled. But she didn't cry. She didn't panic. She just leaned closer, rested her forehead to his, and whispered, "I know you now." Far across the fields, a single goat collapsed without warning. It gave no cry. No stagger. It simply dropped, stiff and lifeless, its eyes wide open, staring blankly into the night sky. The other goats fled from it, scattering in panic. The herder, a boy of 12, came running barefoot from his mat. He found the dead animal cold, tongue swollen, and body bloated, as if days had passed in minutes. The chief was told before sunrise. He rose with sweat already on his brow, having dreamed of red waters and crying roots. He didn't tell anyone. But his face grew hard. The elders followed him. They went as a group, reluctant but curious, to the cage. They stopped several paces away, unwilling to cross the line of scattered feathers and herbs that Mwamba had laid nights before. Everything looked the same at first. The cage door was shut. The lock untouched. No blood. No smoke. No cries. Nyoka sat in the center, unmoving. But then the midwife gasped. "The baby," she whispered. It's different." The elders squinted through the bars. And there it was, the baby no longer lay limp with its head thrown back and mouth agape. Instead, it was nestled firmly in Nyoka's arms, one small hand resting on her collarbone. Its head tilted toward her chest, lips closed, eyes shut. But too neatly. Too gently. As if he had simply fallen asleep. "What trick is this?" one elder muttered. "Witchcraft," said another. The midwife stepped forward before the others could stop her. "She was holding him the other way just yesterday," she said. "I remember." His back was to her chest. "Now it's..." She paused. The wrapper, it was no longer soaked and stiff. no longer marked by dried blood and caked filth. It looked clean. Not new, but fresh. Soft. As though it had been washed and laid in sunlight. The chief took a step forward. "Don't go near her," he said sharply. "The cage remains shut. Leave it." But it moved. "I said leave it." His voice cracked like thunder. The group withdrew, slowly, some with quick glances over their shoulders. The chief stood last, staring hard at Nyoka. She did not return his gaze. She only stroked her baby's head slowly, lovingly, as though he were alive, as though he were always alive. That night, no crows came. But something else did. The village dogs refused to leave their huts, whimpering into the dirt. Babies cried longer than usual. A newborn in the eastern compound went silent for nearly 2 hours, only to suddenly gasp back to life with a scream so loud it cracked a calabash. The midwife's gourd of drinking water turned sour. A pot of yam stew spoiled while boiling. And in the dark, beneath the baobab, the cage no longer creaked. But something inside it breathed. That night, Nyoka's body slept. But her spirit did not. Her eyes fluttered shut beneath the fading stars, her arms still curled protectively around the baby. The air was thick, silent, and almost too still, as if holding its breath for what came next. Then something stirred beneath her skin. A tug. Not painful. Not frightening. Just a pull, like a thread being gently drawn from her chest, guiding her somewhere deeper. She opened her eyes, not in the cage, but in a place without walls. A realm of shadows. There was no ground beneath her feet, but she stood. The sky above was not sky, it pulsed like dark water lit from beneath, swirling with deep violet and black. Strange trees floated around her, their roots tangled in smoke, their branches whispering without wind. Nyoka didn't speak. But her heart beat like a drum, slow, heavy, remembering something it hadn't known in years. From the mist ahead, a small figure emerged. The child. Her son. But not as he was in her arms. Here, he walked upright, glowing faintly gold from within. His skin shimmered like he was carved from starlight, and his eyes, black as pitch, saw her without blinking. "Mother," he said. The voice didn't come from his mouth. It rang inside her bones. She fell to her knees, reaching for him, but her hands passed through his image like fog. Tears streamed down her cheeks. "Is this death?" she whispered. "No," said the child. "This is memory. Yours. And mine." He lifted his hand. Around them, the shadows twisted, and began to take shape. The village appeared. Not as it was now, but older, rougher, full of men and women with painted faces and bright ash smeared across their brows. The trees were thicker then, the huts fewer. The air was louder, wilder. The people danced in flames, chanting words Nyoka didn't recognize, but somewhere in her blood, something responded. She turned. A tall woman stepped from the flames. Her skin was like Nyoka's. Her face carried the same sharp cheekbones, the same wide eyes. But her hair was white as smoke, and her gaze, it burned with knowing. "She was one of us," said the child. "Who?" "Your mother's mother's mother," the child replied. "A blood spirit. Keeper of forest breath. Her name was Isha." Nyoka watched as Isha raised her hands, speaking to a crowd. The villagers knelt before her. But then, another group arrived. Men with iron blades. Women with black veils. Their leader wore a carved ivory horn around his neck. Nyoka's eyes widened. "That's the current chief's line," she whispered. The child nodded. "Yes. Their ancestors." The vision shifted. The new arrivals accused Isha of sorcery. They declared the forest too wild, too sacred. They wanted control, fields, goats, borders. Not spirit songs. And so, the ancestors of the current chief drove Isha's people out. Burned their sacred groves. Cut down their truth trees. sealed the river mouth with bones. The last thing Isha did before vanishing into the mist was leave a warning carved into bark: one day, a child will return. One who does not scream. One who will not beg. That child will remember everything you tried to forget. The forest pulsed. The vision shifted again, now showing the unborn child in the womb. Nyoka saw herself, heavy with life, asleep beneath a rain-soaked roof. And within her belly, the baby stirred, not blindly, not aimlessly. He opened his eyes. Still unborn. Still curled in darkness. But already, watching. The spirit world blurred. The child's glowing form looked up at her. "I saw everything," he said. "Before I took my first breath. I saw what they did. What they still do." Nyoka's voice cracked. "But why not cry? Why not live?" "I chose not to cry," he said. "Because they did not deserve my voice. Not yet." Thunder echoed across the realm. "You were not cursed, Mama. You were chosen. Through you, the forgotten blood flows again. I had to return through you, the last daughter of Isha." Suddenly, shadows began to gather behind the child. Tall, towering shapes, faces carved with age, eyes glowing dimly. Some bore twisted staffs. Others had vines growing through their ribs. They stood in a silent ring. Ancestors. The true ones. Not of the village, but of the old ways. Of the wind and the dark and the forest's breath. One of them stepped forward, speaking in a tongue older than Nyoka's thoughts. But still, she understood. "You were cast out so they could rise. But the balance is broken. The forest mourns. The bones remember. The child you birthed is not just yours, he is the answer to a promise." Nyoka could barely breathe. What promise? The spirits spoke as one. That no cry would be given to those who do not hear. That no mercy would come to those who buried truth beneath ash. The child's spirit turned back to her. "I died because I had to. But death does not end what I carry. My silence was not weakness, it was waiting. You must carry me now. Not in body. In fire." Nyoka choked on her tears. "I don't know how." "Yes, you do," he said softly. "You already have. When you stayed. When you endured. When you saw." The spirits raised their hands. The ground lit up with symbols, glowing red-orange, swirling into her feet, her chest, her mouth. "Let them fear what they made," the spirits chanted. "Let them feel the silence before the storm." The child stepped backward, swallowed into the mist. "Remember me," his voice whispered. Then everything fell away. Nyoka woke with a gasp. She was still in the cage. But everything felt changed. Her fingers still cradled the child's body, but now, she didn't feel only grief. She felt power. Ancient, sorrowful, rising like smoke from deep beneath her ribs. She looked down at the baby, and though his eyes were shut again, his face bore a peace that hadn't been there before. His mouth curled slightly, not quite a smile, but not pain. Outside the cage, the trees swayed though there was no wind. And in the center of the village, an old drum split down the middle without being touched. Dawn broke with a sky the color of bruised fruit, heavy, swollen, purple-black in the east. A hush hung over the village as though the trees themselves were holding their breath. Word had passed like fever through every hut the night before. The chief had given the order, at sunrise, the cage will burn. Some came out of fear. Others came because they believed the fire would rid them of the whispers, the spoiled food, the dreams. Still others came simply because they had nothing left but dread. Their lives had been unraveling since Nyoka's screams first split the air, since the baby was born and did not cry. Now, even silence was dangerous. They stood in a wide circle, far back from the cage near the edge of the woods, torches clutched in shaking hands. The metal bars were black with soot, slick with mist. Inside, Nyoka sat cross-legged. Her arms cradled the still bundle, no longer gray or stiff, as if it had never died at all. She looked up slowly, calmly, as though she'd been expecting them. The chief stepped forward. He was flanked by the 3 eldest hunters and the village firekeeper, Ko, a large man whose hands rarely trembled, until now. "This must end," the chief said, voice low, but firm. "We delayed too long. The air is sick. The goats are dying. My son won't sleep. No one can eat. Look at her. That is no longer a woman. That is something else. And we let it grow." No one replied. Even the birds in the forest had gone quiet. "Burn it," the chief ordered. Ko stepped forward and touched the torch to the dry grass and sticks piled around the cage's base. The flames licked hungrily, then stopped. The fire sputtered, hissed, and fizzled like spit on iron. Smoke curled upward, but no heat came with it. Ko tried again, lighting the edge of a thatch mat. It flared brightly, then extinguished as if a wind had passed through it, though no wind stirred the leaves. Again and again, they tried. Oil. Palm fronds. Old bones dipped in pitch. But nothing caught. The fire would not rise. Then Nyoka spoke. For the first time since she had been locked away, her voice cut through the air, not loud, not angry. Quiet. Clear. Like the first note of a long-forgotten song. "You want to burn your forgiveness." Some stepped back. The chief narrowed his eyes. "What nonsense are you speaking?" he spat. Nyoka looked down at the baby in her arms. "He came to forgive. But you never asked." Mwamba's voice rang out from somewhere in the crowd. She had been led to the edge of the circle by a child who no longer slept. The old woman pointed toward the cage with her walking stick. "You fools," she croaked. "It is not fire that will end this." Thunder cracked, sharp, violent, immediate, though the sky above the cage remained dry. The earth trembled beneath their feet. The villagers gasped, some clutching one another, others stumbling away. Then came the sound. Not thunder. Not wind. Not even the wail of a woman. A cry. A baby's cry. It started as a low whimper, thin, dry, scratchy like leaves on sand, but then it grew. Full. Deep. Piercing. The kind of cry that made your skin forget how to breathe. Nyoka did not flinch. Her arms held firm. The baby opened its eyes. Fully. No longer shut tight in death's grasp. No longer fluttering between worlds. The black of its irises swallowed everything, no white, no color. Just void and reflection. The baby turned its face toward the villagers. And screamed. The cry shattered glass. All of it. Clay jars split. Bottles in the elder's hut exploded. Even the glass trinket hidden in the chief's wife's chest, the one passed down for generations, cracked down the middle. Children dropped to their knees, covering their ears. Old men wept without knowing why. Then the baby went silent again. Just once. Just that one cry. That one sound. And it was enough. Smoke no longer curled from the cage. The wood lay unburned but blackened, as if something had stolen the heat away. Leaves turned to ash without flame. Crows circled once overhead and vanished west, gone with the wind. No one moved for a long time. Mwamba was the first to step forward, her feet steady, her face calm. She placed a bowl of clean water at the edge of the cage. "She has passed the test," she said. "And so has he." The chief fell to his knees, his mouth open, hands shaking. Somewhere behind him, a child whispered, "Is the curse gone?" "No," Mwamba replied. "The curse is just beginning, but it no longer belongs to her." And the baby blinked. No one slept that night. Not the birds in the trees, not the crickets in the grass, not even the ghosts that usually crept beneath the village roofs. A silence hung so thick, it seemed to smother breath itself. But just before the first rooster crowed, the baby cried again. Not a full scream this time, just a single rising note. Piercing. Cold. Ancient. Then, it began. From one end of the village to the other, babies and infants, those still suckling, those who had not yet learned to walk, all woke at once. And they cried. Not out of hunger. Not out of pain. They cried because something inside them remembered. Something older than their tiny hearts, older than the huts that sheltered them. Their cries rang in perfect sync, as if one breath, one voice had entered them all. Mothers clutched their children, terrified. Fathers whispered prayers through gritted teeth. But it was too late. The village had been heard. In the circle near the cage, the elders, who had gathered first to lead the burning, now clutched their heads. One by one, they collapsed to their knees, blood leaking from their ears and noses. Some tried to crawl away, others mumbled forgotten prayers, but none could escape the sound. It wasn't just the crying, it was the truth beneath it. The sound tore through their memories, unearthing everything they'd buried: betrayals, banishments, false judgments, children left in the woods for crying too much, or not enough. They had silenced many. Now, the silence screamed back. Behind the cage, the forest shimmered. The air bent and thickened. From its edges, shadows emerged, but these were not the shapes of animals or men. These were tall, gaunt forms draped in leaves and bones, with glowing white eyes but no mouths. They stood like watchers, or judges, the ancestors who had been denied, those banished from the village's stories. One by one, they took position behind Nyoka's cage, circling it like a silent tribunal. And then, without a single flame, the cage melted. Not into smoke or ash, but into roots and vines. Thick tendrils curled from the iron bars, sprouting leaves and bark. The floor beneath her twisted into living wood. Thorns unfurled, bloomed, and died again in seconds. When the last bar collapsed into moss, Nyoka stepped forward. She was barefoot. Her tattered dress floated as if moved by a current no one else felt. The baby lay quiet in her arms, eyes wide open, watching, not just seeing, but judging. Her steps were slow, deliberate. Each footfall left prints of glowing soil. No one dared move. Not the chief, not the warriors, not the mother who had once spat on her shadow. She walked into the village square. And there, she stopped. The ancestral shadows followed, standing behind her like a curtain of judgment. The crying of the village children still rang through the air, but now it felt like a chant. A chorus of remembering. Then the baby opened its mouth. But it did not cry. It spoke. Not in any tongue known to the living, not in Swahili, or Nyanja, or the old hunters' dialects. The sound that came out was raw and holy, like rivers speaking to stone. The words twisted in the air, cracking it. The wind itself paused. And beneath the baby's voice, the earth groaned. Suddenly, violently, a tear split the ground beneath the elder's hut. Cracks raced outward, breaking through stone and bone. Then, with a shattering scream of wood and dust, a massive tree burst from the earth. Its roots tore through the hut, ripping it apart. Walls crumbled. Clay pots exploded. The tree grew faster than anything should, taller than the palm trees, wider than 5 men. Its bark was dark as bloodwood, its leaves silver green, shimmering like blades. At the center of its trunk, faces began to form. Not carved. Not painted. Real faces, eyes shut, mouths open, as if trapped mid-confession. Some were old, others young. Some weeping. Some silent. The elder whose hut had been destroyed lay curled in the dirt. His mouth opened to scream, but only dust came out. Nyoka stepped to the base of the tree. The baby's eyes turned from the elder to the crowd. Then it spoke again. This time, the words split the sky. Lightning flashed, though there were no clouds. Thunder rippled the air. The ground glowed beneath Nyoka's feet. Those who had once mocked her, the woman who called her witch, the boy who threw dung at her cage, the man who laughed when she gave birth in silence, all dropped to their knees. Some wept. Some begged. Some began running, but the forest would not let them pass. Roots rose from the earth, blocking the paths. There was nowhere left to go. Mwamba stood quietly to the side, eyes closed, murmuring a song no one else knew. The shadows did not touch her. Nor the roots. She whispered, "It has begun. What was stolen must now return." The chief, broken and pale, tried to lift his staff, to declare something, anything, but it crumbled in his hands. "And Nyoka?" She turned to face the village. Her voice rang clear. This was never about a curse. She held the baby higher, as the shadows behind her shifted. This is about memory. About the voices you buried. The blood you drank and called tradition. The children you feared because they saw what you refused to see. The baby blinked slowly, and in that moment, a ripple passed through every soul in the village. Some fainted. Some heard the names of people they had forgotten. Some saw their own faces, young and crying, abandoned beneath trees. The tree behind Nyoka pulsed once more. A single leaf drifted down, landing at the elder's feet. And where it touched, the ground began to crack again. The ground in the village square trembled, not with the fury of a storm, but with something deeper, older. The earth groaned beneath their feet like a slumbering beast long denied rest. Nyoka stood still, barefoot in the center, her child nestled against her chest, no longer cold, no longer silent. Around her, villagers dropped to their knees, not from reverence but from something heavier, recognition. Mwamba stepped forward, her eyes still milky with blindness, yet her gaze landed straight on the chief. "You feel it, don't you?" she said, her voice cracking like a dry tree branch. "The bones under your feet remember." No one answered. The ground beneath the chief's stool shifted, and a crack split the hard clay, thin but deep, like a whisper being carved into the earth. A foul smell crept up, not rot, but something more terrifying, ancient blood, unhealed and unclaimed. Mwamba spoke again, but this time her voice came layered, as if speaking alongside her was a chorus of voices from another time. There was a woman before. A girl they said was wild. She bore a child too early, they claimed. Said the earth would swallow them both unless the blood was offered willingly. The villagers exchanged nervous glances. It was not a tale anyone remembered aloud, but the silence in their mother's eyes whenever the rains were late or the crops grew twisted, that silence had always hinted at something unspoken. Nyoka turned slowly, her voice soft and wind-wrapped. "They buried her alive, didn't they? Her and the baby." Mwamba nodded. "Under this very square." Another crack opened, and from it rose the faintest shimmer of a silver anklet, half buried in red dust. A child pointed. An elder backed away, muttering prayers under his breath. "They called her sacrifice," Nyoka whispered. "They called her necessary. But she was my blood." It wasn't just the ground splitting now, it was memory. Generations of denial unraveling in threads so thin and sharp they cut as they fell. A scream, distant and ghostly, rang out, but none could say if it came from now or then. The chief tried to speak, but no sound came. His throat locked. Behind Nyoka, the baby blinked. Its eyes no longer black, they shimmered with the reflection of fire, of trees, of storm clouds and grave soil. In its tiny chest pulsed not just a heart, but something more vast, like a drumbeat echoing across time. "This curse," Nyoka said, raising her head, "was never me. It was never him. It was the silence. It was your fear wrapped in stories, passed down like poison in a clay cup." Thunder cracked in a cloudless sky. One of the villagers, an old man who'd lived through 4 chiefs, collapsed in tears. "We were told, it had to be done, to keep the famine away. To keep the forest from swallowing the land. But it never stayed away," Mwamba hissed. "Because the land was never hungry, it was grieving." Roots surged up from the earth now, thick and coiling like serpents. They tore through clay and thatch, gripping the ground like fingers long buried and now returning to claim what was theirs. A single tendril brushed Nyoka's ankle, gently. It curled around her foot like it remembered her. The baby cooed. The sound was not sweet, it was sacred. A woman in the crowd, holding her own child, began sobbing. "My grandmother said there was a drum that beat beneath the earth. She said if you stepped wrong, it would call the forest. I thought it was just a story. Nyoka looked at her. It was a memory. And now it's awake. Behind her, a hollow moan echoed, the kind of sound a mother makes when mourning something too deep for words. It wasn't human. It wasn't animal. It was the earth. The roots didn't lash out. They cradled the old fire pit in the center of the square, the one the villagers used for all celebrations and announcements. It split open, revealing not ash, but bones. A small skull. A bracelet, still glinting faintly in the firelight. The same lullaby Mwamba had hummed all her life filled the air, but no one was singing it. Nyoka stepped forward and laid her hand over the earth. You buried truth beneath your feet and called it peace. But truth has roots. The baby stirred in her arms. One word came from its lips, no one recognized the tongue, but every soul understood its meaning, judgment. And the village finally knew, this was not about a single birth, or even a single death. It was about generations buried under silence. And the soil had decided it would stay silent no longer. The rains returned quietly, as if they too were uncertain of their place. No thunder, no flooding. Just soft drops that kissed the soil and coaxed green life back from the dead earth. The village looked different now, not just in form, but in spirit. Children ran barefoot again, but never near the woods. And never when the shadows stretched too long. Where the chief's compound once stood, only charred wood and moss-covered stone remained. No one dared rebuild there. The land had chosen to keep its wound visible. It was a reminder. The village no longer needed a chief. Leadership became silent, shared, and wary. Mwamba was gone. Some said she wandered into the forest and never returned. Others whispered that she dissolved into the mist the night the roots rose. A few swore she became one of the ancestral judges, still walking among the trees. No one questioned her absence aloud. Silence had cost them before. Nyoka walked freely now. She did not hide her face, nor the child that clung silently to her hip or back, swaddled in dyed cloth the color of nightfall. The child did not cry. It never cried. It only watched, with eyes darker than night, deeper than grief, older than time. The villagers gave them space. And respect. Not out of fear, not exactly. But because the earth had shown them what it remembered. And what it would never forget. Children whispered stories when adults weren't listening. They played a game where one of them would pretend to lie, and the others would shush them urgently, glancing toward the edge of the forest. If you lie too much, they said, the baby with black eyes will hear. And then they'd run screaming, laughing, but never toward the trees. Always away. No one dared touch the cage. It still sat where it had been left, beside the woods, half swallowed by creeping vines and wildflowers that bloomed in strange colors. In the light of day, it seemed rusted and hollow. But in the twilight, when the light bent strangely through the leaves, some swore they saw shapes sitting inside. A woman's curve, a child's stillness. No one checked. Once, a wandering traveler passed through, asking about a place to rest. The villagers guided him to the far end of the village and told him gently, not near the woods. Not near the cage. He didn't understand, but he obeyed. They never named the child. No one asked its name, and Nyoka never offered one. Some called it the Watcher, others the Silent One. But most simply said the child. As if naming it would claim something they had no right to hold. In the fields, crops began to grow in strange patterns, circles, spirals, knots. The elders pretended not to notice. But during planting season, no one turned their backs to the soil for too long. And at night, all doors were latched, not out of habit, but out of respect. Still, no harm came to those who had spoken the truth, or wept when the truth was revealed. It was as though the land itself knew the difference between those who buried silence and those who carried it. Nyoka spoke little. But sometimes, in the cool of early morning, she could be seen standing at the edge of the cage, the child in her arms. She did not look at it. She looked beyond it, at something the others couldn't see. The child, however, always looked back toward the village. On one such morning, a young girl approached, trembling. She bowed low, then asked, "Is he angry?" Nyoka turned to her slowly, and for a moment, said nothing. Then she answered, "No. But he remembers." The girl ran back home in tears. She didn't know why. Seasons passed. New children were born, and none bore black eyes. But sometimes, they dreamed of roots, of cages, of lullabies hummed in a voice that did not belong to their mothers. And when they woke, they remembered only that they should not lie. Or forget. The baby grew slowly. Or perhaps it didn't grow at all. It was hard to say. Some days it looked like a toddler. Other days, like a newborn again. Time bent strangely around it. But the cage remained. And in the cool hours before dawn, something always stirred within it. A faint rustling. A breath. A presence. They thought they locked away a mother and her dead child. But the dead were never truly in the cage.